The 2nd of October is celebrated as the International Day of Non-Violence. But do you ever wonder why, in a world filled with so much violence, we still haven't found a lasting solution to peace? In the midst of global conflicts, war, and division, is there something we've forgotten, something that can guide us toward harmony and compassion? From the bloody battlefields of ancient history to the political struggles of modern times, humanity has been in search of peace. Yet, over 2,500 years ago, there was a man who offered a path to end suffering, conflict, and hatred. That man was the Buddha. His message of non-violence and compassion still holds the power to transform societies and guide us through the most turbulent times. This video explores how Buddha's teachings shaped history and how they continue to inspire movements for peace in a world desperate for answers. Buddha, born as Siddhartha Gautama in ancient India, embarked on a quest to understand human suffering. After years of deep meditation, he reached enlightenment and uncovered the path to inner peace, the Noble Eightfold Path. But Buddha's message wasn't limited to individual liberation. It was a guide for harmonious living, one rooted in non-violence, compassion, and understanding. These principles would go on to influence not only individuals but entire nations. Buddha's timeless teachings have inspired leaders, shaped policies, and guided movements toward peace across the globe. One of the most striking examples of Buddha's teachings transforming an entire nation is the story of Emperor Ashoka of India. Initially known as a fierce and ruthless conqueror, Ashoka's reign was marked by violence, particularly during the brutal Kalinga War. The immense bloodshed of that conflict deeply disturbed him, and it led to a profound change of heart. After witnessing the devastation of war, Ashoka turned to Buddhism and vowed to lead through peace, not violence. His conversion marked the beginning of a new era, a state-led model of governance based on non-violence. Ashoka's empire became one of moral governance, where laws were guided by Buddhist principles of compassion, kindness, and respect for all life. Ashoka's famous edicts, carved onto rocks and pillars across his empire, promoted non-violence, tolerance, and welfare for both humans and animals. He sent emissaries to spread the message of peace to distant lands, and instead of expanding his empire through war, he expanded it through diplomacy and goodwill. Ashoka stands as one of history's earliest examples of how a ruler can successfully govern a vast empire through policies of peace, compassion, and non-violence. From its birthplace in India, Buddhism spread across Asia, reaching regions like China, Japan, Tibet, and Southeast Asia. As it spread, rulers and leaders embraced its core teachings, reshaping their governance to reflect compassion and non-violence. In China during the Tang dynasty, Buddhist principles were woven into the fabric of society, influencing law, culture, and governance. Emperor Taizong of the Tang dynasty was known to have been deeply influenced by Buddhist philosophy, fostering a reign of relative peace and tolerance. In Japan, Zen Buddhism emerged as a spiritual force that encouraged mindfulness and non-violence. Even the samurai, warriors by trade, were guided by principles of peace and restraint, balancing the martial with the spiritual. In Tibet, Buddhism became the foundation of society, where leaders like the Dalai Lamas guided both religious and political life. The 14th Dalai Lama, a global icon of peace, continues to advocate for compassion, non-violence, and dialogue in the face of conflict, showing the world that Buddha's message is timeless and universal. Buddha's teachings of non-violence have also guided some of the most transformative social movements and leaders of the modern era that have shaped the course of history. In the context of modern India, one of the most significant figures influenced by Buddhism was Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, the principal architect of the Indian Constitution. Born into a marginalized community, Ambedkar faced systemic discrimination throughout his life. In his pursuit of social justice and equality, he found profound inspiration in Buddha's teachings. Ambedkar saw in Buddhism a path to liberation from the caste system and its violence against the oppressed. In 1956, he publicly embraced Buddhism, leading a mass conversion of millions from marginalized communities to the faith, advocating for a society based on the principles of equality, compassion, and non-violence. Ambedkar's drafting of the Indian Constitution reflected these values, embedding principles of social justice, human dignity, and peaceful coexistence into the foundation of modern India. Mahatma Gandhi, often called the father of non-violence, also drew inspirations from Buddhist principles in his fight for India's independence from British colonial rule. Gandhi believed in ahimsa, the principle of non-violence, and led massive non-violent protests that eventually brought down one of the most powerful empires in the world. His success proved that non-violence could be a powerful tool for change, even against seemingly insurmountable forces. Similarly, in the United States, Martin Luther King Jr. was inspired by Gandhi and the teachings of Buddha. Through peaceful protest and civil disobedience, King led the civil rights movement, fighting against racial segregation and inequality. His commitment to non-violence helped dismantle institutional racism and brought about significant social change. Nelson Mandela, after decades of imprisonment under South Africa's apartheid regime, emerged as a global symbol of forgiveness and non-violence. Mandela's approach to reconciliation rather than revenge helped peacefully transition South Africa into a democratic state. These leaders, inspired by the teachings of non-violence, reshaped their nations and left legacies of peace and justice that continue to inspire the world. In more recent history, Buddha's teachings of non-violence have inspired nations to adopt policies that reflect these principles. One of the most striking examples comes from Costa Rica, a country that abolished its military in 1949. Instead of investing in arms, Costa Rica chose to invest in education, healthcare, and social welfare, creating a peaceful, stable society without the need for military force. Similarly, Bhutan, a nation rooted in Buddhist values, has prioritized gross national happiness over gross domestic product. By focusing on well-being, environmental conservation, and compassion, Bhutan presents an alternative model to conventional, militarized governance. In Europe, after centuries of devastating wars, countries came together to form the European Union, promoting peace through dialogue, cooperation, and shared values, rejecting the military solutions that had torn the continent apart. Each of these examples reflects how modern nations, inspired by the core principles of peace and non-violence, can govern successfully without resorting to violence or aggression. During the Cold War, when the world was polarized between the United States and the Soviet Union, a group of newly independent nations sought to break away from this global arms race and pursue a different path, the path of non-alignment. The non-aligned movement, led by figures like Jawaharlal Nehru of India, Sukarno of Indonesia, and Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, chose not to align with either superpower, instead advocating for peace, mutual respect, and non-interference in the internal affairs of other states. These leaders, many of whom were deeply influenced by Buddhist principles, sought to establish a world order based on peaceful coexistence and non-violence. the non-aligned movement became a powerful force in global diplomacy, standing as a testament to the idea that non-violence could be a guiding principle for international relations, even during the most tense periods of global conflict. Fast forward to the present day, and the world continues to be marred by conflicts, civil wars, international disputes, and the ongoing refugee crises. Whether it's the devastating war in Ukraine, the tensions in the Middle East, or political unrest in various parts of the world, and tensions between major global powers, we are constantly reminded of the consequences of destructive nature of violence and hatred. In such times, Buddha's teachings of non-violence, compassion, and understanding hold immense relevance. His philosophy offers a timeless solution to the cycles of conflict. Rather than responding to violence with more violence, Buddha urged us to cultivate inner peace, compassion for others, and to resolve differences through dialogue. Today, peace movements, diplomatic efforts, and international organizations like the United Nations echo these ancient teachings. Initiatives focused on conflict resolution, sustainable development, and human rights draw inspiration from the same values that the Buddha emphasized over 2,500 years ago. As we look at the world today, it's clear that Buddha's message of peace and non-violence is not just a relic of the past. It is a timeless guide that can help us navigate the challenges of the present. His message is not just for monks or philosophers. It is for all of humanity. From the teachings that transformed Ashoka's empire to the principles that guided leaders like Ambedkar, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and Nelson Mandela, Buddha's message has the power to bring about real, lasting change. In today's conflict-ridden world, where violence seems all too common, we must remember the wisdom of Buddha. Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. His teachings remind us that peace is not an abstract idea, but a practical, achievable reality, one that begins with compassion and non-violence. We live in an era of great challenges, but we also have the opportunity to make choices that reflect our highest values. We can choose to end cycles of hatred, to seek dialogue instead of conflict, and to care for one another, just as Buddha taught centuries ago. Whether we are world leaders, activists, or ordinary citizens, we all have the power to contribute to a more peaceful world. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Buddha's timeless message. Let us carry this wisdom with us, not just as knowledge, but as a way of life. Together, we can build a world where peace prevails over violence and compassion triumphs over hatred.